Good evening. Tonight, the stories you are about to hear are not the gentle ones. They come from an older time, when the forests were darker, when houses stood alone at the edge of silence, and when not every path led safely home. You may hear of a girl who followed curiosity into a place she should never have gone, of a man who chose death itself to stand beside his child, of hidden houses, strange bargains, and quiet dangers waiting behind ordinary doors. These are stories that move slowly, like embers fading in a fire, like footsteps in an empty wood. There is no need to follow every detail, no need to understand everything. Just listen as the night grows deeper, as the world becomes softer, and as your thoughts begin to drift away. And now we begin with a girl who would not listen, and a house at the edge of the forest that was never meant to be found. The wishing table, the gold ass, and the cudgel in the sack. There was once upon a time a tailor who had 3 sons and only 1 goat. But as the goat supported the whole of them with her milk, she was obliged to have good food and to be taken every day to pasture. The sons, therefore, did this in turn. Once the eldest took her to the churchyard, where the finest herbs were to be found, and let her eat and run about there. At night, when it was time to go home, he asked, "Goat, hast thou had enough?" The goat answered, "I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch, meh, meh." "Come home then," said the youth, and took hold of the cord round her neck, led her into the stable, and tied her up securely. "Well," said the old tailor, "has the goat had as much food as she ought?" "Oh," answered the son, "she has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch." But the father wished to satisfy himself, and went down to the stable, stroked the dear animal, and asked, "Goat, art thou satisfied?" The goat answered, "Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no food, so went without meh, meh." "What do I hear?" cried the tailor, and ran upstairs, and said to the youth, "Hollo thou, liar, thou saidest the goat had had enough, and hast let her hunger." And in his anger he took the yard measure from the wall, and drove him out with blows. Next day it was the turn of the second son, who looked out for a place in the fence of the garden where nothing but good herbs grew, and the goat cleared them all off. At night, when he wanted to go home, he asked, "Goat, art thou satisfied?" The goat answered, "I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch, meh, meh." "Come home then," said the youth, and led her home and tied her up in the stable. "Well," said the old tailor, "has the goat had as much food as she ought?" "Oh," answered the son, "she has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch." The tailor would not rely on this, but went down to the stable and said, "Goat, hast thou had enough?" The goat answered, "Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no food, so went without meh. "The godless wretch," cried the tailor, "to let such a good animal hunger." And he ran up and drove the youth out of doors with the yard measure. Now came the turn of the third son, who wanted to do the thing well, and sought out some bushes with the finest leaves, and let the goat devour them. In the evening, when he wanted to go home, he asked, "Goat, hast thou had enough?" The goat answered, "I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch, meh. "Come home then," said the youth, and led her into the stable and tied her up. "Well," said the old tailor, "has the goat had a proper amount of food? She has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch." The tailor did not trust to that, but went down and asked, "Goat, hast thou had enough?" The wicked beast answered, "Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no leaves, so went without meh. "Oh, the brood of liars," cried the tailor, "each as wicked and forgetful of his duty as the other. Ye shall no longer make a fool of me." And quite beside himself with anger, he ran upstairs and belabored the poor young fellow so vigorously with the yard measure that he sprang out of the house. The old tailor was now alone with his goat. Next morning, he went down into the stable, caressed the goat, and said, "Come, my dear little animal, I will take thee to feed myself." He took her by the rope and conducted her to green hedges and amongst milfoil and whatever else goats like to eat. "There thou mayest for once eat to thy heart's content," said he to her, and let her browse till evening. Then he asked, "Goat, art thou satisfied?" She replied, "I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch, meh. "Come home then," said the tailor, and led her into the stable and tied her fast. When he was going away, he turned round again and said, "Well, art thou satisfied for once?" But the goat did not behave the better to him, and cried, "Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves leapt about, and found no leaves, so went without meh. when the tailor heard that he was shocked and saw clearly that he had driven away his 3 sons without cause. "Wait, thou ungrateful creature," cried he. "It is not enough to drive thee forth. I will mark thee so that thou wilt no more dare to show thyself amongst honest tailors." Oh. In great haste, he ran upstairs, fetched his razor, lathered the goat's head, and shaved her as clean as the palm of his hand. And as the yard measure would have been too good for her, he brought the horsewhip and gave her such cuts with it that she ran away in violent haste. When the tailor was thus left quite alone in his house, he fell into great grief and would gladly have had his sons back again, but no one knew whither they were gone. The eldest had apprenticed himself to a joiner and learnt industriously and indefatigably, and when the time came for him to go traveling, his master presented him with a little table, which had no particular appearance, and was made of common wood, but it had one good property. If anyone set it out and said, "Little table, spread thyself," the good little table was at once covered with a clean little cloth, and a plate was there, and a knife and fork beside it, and dishes with boiled meats and roasted meats, as many as there was room for, and a great glass of red wine shone so that it made the heart glad. The young journeyman thought, "With this thou hast enough for thy whole life," and went joyously about the world, and never troubled himself at all whether an inn was good or bad, or if anything was to be found in it or not. When it suited him, he did not enter an inn at all, but either on the plain in a wood, a meadow, or wherever he fancied, he took his little table off his back, set it down before him, and said, "Cover thyself." And then everything appeared that his heart desired. At length he took it into his head to go back to his father, whose anger would now be appeased, and who would now willingly receive him with his wishing table. It came to pass that on his way home he came one evening to an inn which was filled with guests. They bade him welcome and invited him to sit and eat with them, for otherwise he would have difficulty in getting anything. "No," answered the joiner, "I will not take the few bites out of your mouths, rather than that you shall be my guests." They laughed and thought he was jesting with them. He, however, placed his wooden table in the middle of the room and said, "Little table, cover thyself." Down. Instantly, it was covered with food so good that the host could never have procured it, and the smell of it ascended pleasantly to the nostrils of the guests. "Fall to dear friends," said the joiner, and the guests, when they saw that he meant it did not need to be asked twice, but drew near, pulled out their knives, and attacked it valiantly. And what surprised them the most was that when a dish became empty, a full one instantly took its place of its own accord. The innkeeper stood in one corner and watched the affair. He did not at all know what to say, but thought, "Thou couldst easily find a use for such a cook as that in thy kitchen." The joiner and his comrades made merry until late into the night. At length, they lay down to sleep, and the young apprentice also went to bed and set his magic table against the wall. The host's thoughts, however, let him have no rest. It occurred to him that there was a little old table in his lumber room which looked just like the apprentice's, and he brought it out quite softly and exchanged it for the wishing table. Next morning, the joiner paid for his bed, took up his table, never thinking that he had got a false one, and went his way. At midday, he reached his father, who received him with great joy. "Well, my dear son, what hast thou learnt?" said he to him. "Father, I have become a joiner." "A good trade," replied the old man. "But what hast thou brought back with thee from thy apprenticeship?" "Father, the best thing which I have brought back with me is this little table." The tailor inspected it on all sides and said, "Thou didst not make a masterpiece when thou madst that. It is a bad old table. But it is a table which furnishes itself," replied the son, "when I set it out, and tell it to cover itself. The most beautiful dishes stand on it, and a wine also which gladdens the heart. Just invite all our relations and friends. They shall refresh and enjoy themselves for once, for the table will give them all they require." When the company was assembled, he put his table in the middle of the room and said, "Little table, cover thyself." But the little table did not bestir itself, and remained just as bare as any other table which did not understand language. Then the poor apprentice became aware that his table had been changed, and was ashamed at having to stand there like a liar. The relations, however, mocked him, and were forced to go home without having eaten or drunk. The father brought out his patches again, and went on tailoring, but the son went to a master in the craft. The second son had gone to a miller and had apprenticed himself to him. When his years were over, the master said, "As thou hast conducted thyself so well, I give thee an ass of a peculiar kind, which neither draws a cart nor carries a sack." "To what use is he put then?" asked the young apprentice. "He lets gold drop from his mouth," answered the miller. "If thou settest him on a cloth and sayest, 'Bricklebrit,' the good animal will drop gold pieces for thee." "That is a fine thing," said the apprentice, and thanked the master, and went out into the world. When he had need of gold, he had only to say, "Bricklebrit," to his ass, and it rained gold pieces, and he had nothing to do but pick them off the ground. Wheresoever he went, the best of everything was good enough for him, and the dearer, the better, for he had always a full purse. When he had looked about the world for some time, he thought, "Thou must seek out thy father. If thou goest to him with the gold ass, he will forget his anger and receive thee well." It came to pass that he came to the same public house in which his brother's table had been exchanged. He led his ass by the bridle, and the host was about to take the animal from him and tie him up. But the young apprentice said, "Don't trouble yourself. I will take my gray horse into the stable and tie him up myself too, for I must know where he stands." This struck the host as odd, and he thought that a man who was forced to look after his ass himself could not have much to spend. But when the stranger put his hand in his pocket and brought out 2 gold pieces and said he was to provide something good for him, the host opened his eyes wide and ran and sought out the best he could muster. After dinner, the guest asked what he owed. The host did not see why he should not double the reckoning, and said the apprentice must give 2 more gold pieces. He felt in his pocket, but his gold was just at an end. "Wait an instant, Sir Host," said he. "I will go and fetch some money." But he took the tablecloth with him. The host could not imagine what this could mean, and being curious, stole after him. And as the guest bolted the stable door, he peeped through a hole left by a knot in the wood. The stranger spread out the cloth under the animal and cried, "Bricklebrit," and immediately the beast began to let gold pieces fall, so that it fairly rained down money on the ground. my word, said the host. Ducats are quickly coined there. A purse like that is not amiss. The guest paid his score and went to bed, but in the night the host stole down into the stable, led away the master of the mint, and tied up another ass in his place. Early next morning, the apprentice traveled away with his ass, and thought that he had his gold ass. At midday, he reached his father, who rejoiced to see him again, and gladly took him in. "What hast thou made of thyself, my son?" asked the old man. "A miller." "Dear father," he answered, "what hast thou brought back with thee from thy travels?" "Nothing else but an ass." "There are asses enough here," said the father. "I would rather have had a good goat." "Yes," replied the son, "but it is no common ass, but a gold ass. When I say Bricklebrit, the good beast opens its mouth and drops a whole sheetful of gold pieces. Just summon all our relations hither, and I will make them rich folks." "That suits me well," said the tailor, "for then I shall have no need to torment myself any longer with the needle," and ran out himself and called the relations together. As soon as they were assembled, the miller bade them make way, spread out his cloth, and brought the ass into the room. "Now watch," said he, and cried, "Bricklebrit." But no gold pieces fell, and it was clear that the animal knew nothing of the art, for every ass does not attain such perfection. Then the poor miller pulled a long face, saw that he was betrayed, and begged pardon of the relatives who went home as poor as they came. There was no help for it. The old man had to betake him to his needle once more, and the youth hired himself to a miller. The third brother had apprenticed himself to a turner, and as that is skilled labor, he was the longest in learning. His brothers, however, told him in a letter how badly things had gone with them, and how the innkeeper had cheated them of their beautiful wishing gifts on the last evening before they reached home. When the turner had served his time and had to set out on his travels, as he had conducted himself so well, his master presented him with a sack and said, "There is a cudgel in it." "I can put on the sack," said he, "and it may be of good service to me, but why should the cudgel be in it? It only makes it heavy." "I will tell thee why," replied the master. "If anyone has done anything to injure thee, do but say, 'Out of the sack, cudgel,' and the cudgel will leap forth among the people and play such a dance on their backs that they will not be able to stir or move for a week, and it will not leave off until thou sayest, "Into the sack, Cudgel." The apprentice thanked him and put the sack on his back, and when anyone came too near him and wished to attack him, he said, "Out of the sack, Cudgel." And instantly the cudgel sprang out and dusted the coat or jacket of one after the other on their backs, and never stopped until it had stripped it off them. And it was done so quickly that before anyone was aware, it was already his own turn. In the evening, the young turner reached the inn where his brothers had been cheated. He laid his sack on the table before him and began to talk of all the wonderful things which he had seen in the world. "Yes," said he, "people may easily find a table which will cover itself a gold ass, and things of that kind, extremely good things, which I by no means despise. But these are nothing in comparison with the treasure which I have won for myself, and am carrying about with me in my sack there." The innkeeper pricked up his ears. "What in the world can that be?" thought he. "The sack must be filled with nothing but jewels. I ought to get them cheap, too, for all good things go in threes." When it was time for sleep, the guest stretched himself on the bench and laid his sack beneath him for a pillow. When the innkeeper thought his guest was lying in a sound sleep, he went to him and pushed and pulled quite gently and carefully at the sack to see if he could possibly draw it away and lay another in its place. The turner had, however, been waiting for this for a long time, and now, just as the innkeeper was about to give a hearty tug, he cried, "Out of the sack, Cudgel!" Instantly the little cudgel came forth and fell on the innkeeper and gave him a sound thrashing. The host cried for mercy, but the louder he cried, so much more heavily, the cudgel beat the time on his back until at length he fell to the ground, exhausted. Then the turner said, "If thou dost not give back the table which covers itself and the gold ass, the dance shall begin afresh." "Oh no," cried the host quite humbly. "I will gladly produce everything, only make the accursed kobold creep back into the sack." Then said the apprentice, "I will let mercy take the place of justice, but beware of getting into mischief again." So he cried, "Into the sack, Cudgel," and let him have rest. Next morning, the turner went home to his father with the wishing table and the gold ass. The tailor rejoiced when he saw him once more, and asked him likewise what he had learned in foreign parts. "Dear father," said he, "I have become a turner." "A skilled trade," said the father. "What hast thou brought back with thee from thy travels?" "A precious thing, dear father," replied the son. "A cudgel in the sack." "What?" cried the father. "A cudgel? That's worth thy trouble indeed. From every tree thou can cut thyself one. But not one like this, dear father. If I say, 'Out of the sack, cudgel,' the cudgel springs out and leads anyone who means ill with me a weary dance, and never stops until he lies on the ground and prays for fair weather. Look you, with this cudgel have I got back the wishing table and the gold ass which the thievish innkeeper took away from my brothers. Now let them both be sent for, and invite all our kinsmen. I will give them to eat and to drink, and will fill their pockets with gold into the bargain." The old tailor would not quite believe, but nevertheless got the relatives together. Then the turner spread a cloth in the room and led in the gold ass and said to his brother, "Now, dear brother, speak to him." The miller said, "Bricklebrit," and instantly the gold pieces fell down on the cloth like a thunder shower, and the ass did not stop until every one of them had so much that he could carry no more. I can see in thy face that thou also wouldst like to be there. Then the turner brought the little table and said, "Now, dear brother, speak to it." And scarcely had the carpenter said, "Table, cover thyself," than it was spread and amply covered with the most exquisite dishes. Then such a meal took place as the good tailor had never yet known in his house, and the whole party of kinsmen stayed together till far in the night, and were all merry and glad. The tailor locked away needle and thread, yard measure and goose in a press, and lived with his 3 sons in joy and splendor. What, however, has become of the goat who was to blame for the tailor driving out his 3 sons? That I will tell thee. She was ashamed that she had a bald head, and ran to a fox's hole and crept into it. When the fox came home, he was met by 2 great eyes shining out of the darkness, and was terrified and ran away. A bear met him, and as the fox looked quite disturbed, he said, "What is the matter with thee, brother fox? Why dost thou look like that?" "Ah," answered Redskin, "a fierce beast is in my cave and stared at me with its fiery eyes." "We will soon drive him out," said the bear, and went with him to the cave and looked in. But when he saw the fiery eyes, fear seized on him likewise. He would have nothing to do with the furious beast, and took to his heels. The bee met him, and as she saw that he was ill at ease, she said, "Bear, thou art really pulling a very pitiful face. What has become of all thy gaiety?" "It is all very well for thee to talk," replied the bear. "A furious beast with staring eyes is in Redskin's house, and we can't drive him out." The bee said, "Bear, I pity thee. I am a poor, weak creature whom thou wouldst not turn aside to look at, but still, I believe I can help thee." She flew into the fox's cave, lighted on the goat's smoothly shorn head, and stung her so violently that she sprang up crying, "Meh, meh," and ran forth into the world as if mad, and to this hour no one knows where she has gone. Tom Thumb. There was once a poor countryman who used to sit in the chimney corner all evening and poke the fire while his wife sat at her spinning wheel. And he used to say, "How dull it is without any children about us. Our house is so quiet, and other people's houses so noisy and merry." "Yes," answered his wife, and sighed, "if we could only have one, and that one ever so little, no bigger than my thumb, how happy I should be. It would indeed be having our heart's desire." Now it happened that after a while the woman had a child who was perfect in all his limbs, but no bigger than a thumb. Then the parents said, "He is just what we wished for, and we will love him very much." And they named him, according to his stature, Tom Thumb. And though they gave him plenty of nourishment, he grew no bigger, but remained exactly the same size as when he was first born. And he had very good faculties, and was very quick and prudent, so that all he did prospered. One day, his father made ready to go into the forest to cut wood, and he said as if to himself, "Now I wish there was someone to bring the cart to meet me." "Oh, father," cried Tom Thumb, "I can bring the cart. Let me alone for that, and in proper time too." Then the father laughed and said, "How will you manage that? You are much too little to hold the reins." "That has nothing to do with it, father. While my mother goes on with her spinning, I will sit in the horse's ear and tell him where to go. "Well," answered the father, "we will try it for once." When it was time to set off, the mother went on spinning after setting Tom Thumb in the horse's ear. And so he drove off, crying, "Gee up, gee woe." So the horse went on, quite as if his master were driving him, and drew the wagon along the right road to the wood. Now it happened just as they turned a corner, and the little fellow was calling out, "Gee up," that two strange men passed by. "Look," said one of them. "How is this? There goes a wagon, and the driver is calling to the horse, and yet he is nowhere to be seen." "It is very strange," said the other. "We will follow the wagon and see where it belongs." And the wagon went right through the wood up to the place where the wood had been hewed. When Tom Thumb caught sight of his father, he cried out, "Look, father, here am I with the wagon. Now take me down." The father held the horse with his left hand, and with the right he lifted down his little son out of the horse's ear, and Tom Thumb sat down on a stump, quite happy and content. When the two strangers saw him, they were struck dumb with wonder. At last, one of them, taking the other aside, said to him, "Look here, the little chap would make our fortune if we were to show him in the town for money. Suppose we buy him." So they went up the woodcutter and said, "Sell the little man to us. We will take care he shall come to no harm." "No," answered the father, "he is the apple of my eye, and not for all the money in the world would I sell him." But Tom Thumb, when he heard what was going on, climbed up by his father's coat tails, and perching himself on his shoulder, he whispered in his ear, "Father, you might as well let me go. I will soon come back again." Then the father gave him up to the two men for a large piece of money. They asked him where he would like to sit. "Oh, put me on the brim of your hat," said he. "There I can walk about and view the country, and be in no danger of falling off." So they did as he wished, and when Tom Thumb had taken leave of his father, they set off all together. And they traveled on until it grew dusk, and the little fellow asked to be set down a little while for a change, and after some difficulty they consented. So the man took him down from his hat and set him in a field by the roadside, and he ran away directly. And after creeping about among the furrows, he slipped suddenly into a mouse hole, just what he was looking for. "Good evening, my masters," "You can go home without me," cried he to them, laughing. They ran up and felt about with their sticks in the mouse hole, but in vain. Tom Thumb crept farther and farther in, and as it was growing dark, they had to make the best of their way home, full of vexation and with empty purses. When Tom Thumb found they were gone, he crept out of his hiding place underground. "It is dangerous work groping about these holes in the darkness," said he. "I might easily break my neck." But by good fortune, he came upon an empty snail shell. "That's all right," said he. "Now I can get safely through the night." And he settled himself down in it. Before he had time to get to sleep, he heard two men pass by, and one was saying to the other, "How can we manage to get hold of the rich parson's gold and silver?" "I can tell you how," cried Tom Thumb. "How is this?" said one of the thieves, quite frightened. "I hear someone speak," so they stood still and listened, and Tom Thumb spoke again. "Take me with you. I will show you how to do it." "Where are you then?" asked they. "Look about on the ground and notice where the voice comes from," answered he. At last they found him and lifted him up. "You little elf," said they, "how can you help us?" "Look here," answered he. "I can easily creep between the iron bars of the parson's room and hand out to you whatever you would like to have." "Very well," said they, "we will try what you can do." So when they came to the parsonage house, Tom Thumb crept into the room, but cried out with all his might, "Will you have all that is here?" So the thieves were terrified, and said, "Do speak more softly, lest anyone should be awaked." But Tom Thumb made as if he did not hear them, and cried out again, "What would you like? Will you have all that is here?" So that the cook, who was sleeping in a room hard by, heard it, and raised herself in bed, and listened. The thieves, however, in their fear of being discovered, had run back part of the way, but they took courage again, thinking that it was only a jest of the little fellows. So they came back and whispered to him to be serious and to hand them out something. Then Tom Thumb called out once more as loud as he could, "Oh yes, I will give it all to you. Only put out your hands." Then the listening maid heard him distinctly that time, and jumped out of bed and burst open the door. The thieves ran off as if the wild huntsmen were behind them, but the maid, as she could see, nothing went to fetch a light. And when she came back with one, Tom Thumb had taken himself off without being seen by her into the barn. And the maid, when she had looked in every hole and corner and found nothing, went back to bed at last, and thought that she must have been dreaming with her eyes and ears open. So Tom Thumb crept among the hay and found a comfortable nook to sleep in, where he intended to remain until it was day, and then to go home to his father and mother. But other things were to befall him. Indeed, there is nothing but trouble and worry in this world. The maid got up at dawn of day to feed the cows. The first place she went to was the barn, where she took up an armful of hay, and it happened to be the very heap in which Tom Thumb lay asleep. And he was so fast asleep that he was aware of nothing, and never waked until he was in the mouth of the cow who had taken him up the hay. "Oh dear," cried he, "how is it that I have got into a mill?" But he soon found out where he was, and he had to be very careful not to get between the cow's teeth. And at last he had to descend into the cow's stomach. "The windows were forgotten when this little room was built," said he, "and the sunshine cannot get in. There is no light to be had." His quarters were in every way unpleasant to him, and what was the worst new hay was constantly coming in, and the space was being filled up. At last he cried out in his extremity as loud as he could, "No more hay for me, no more hay for me." The maid was then milking the cow, and as she heard a voice, but could see no one, and as it was the same voice that she had heard in the night, she was so frightened that she fell off her stool and spilt the milk. Then she ran in great haste to her master, crying, "Oh, master, dear, the cow spoke." "You must be crazy," answered her master, and he went himself to the cow house to see what was the matter. No sooner had he put his foot inside the door than Tom Thumb cried out again, "No more hay for me, no more hay for me." Then the parson himself was frightened, supposing that a bad spirit had entered into the cow, and he ordered her to be put to death. So she was killed, but the stomach where Tom Thumb was lying was thrown upon a dunghill. Tom Thumb had great trouble to work his way out of it, and he had just made a space big enough for his head to go through when a new misfortune happened. A hungry wolf ran up and swallowed the whole stomach at one gulp. But Tom Thumb did not lose courage. "Perhaps," thought he, "the wolf will listen to reason." and he cried out from the inside of the wolf, "My dear wolf, I can tell you where to get a splendid meal." "Where is it to be had?" asked the wolf. "In such and such a house, and you must creep into it through the drain, and there you will find cakes and bacon and broth, as much as you can eat." And he described to him his father's house. The wolf needed not to be told twice. He squeezed himself through the drain in the night and feasted in the storeroom to his heart's content. When at last he was satisfied, he wanted to go away again. But he had become so big that to creep the same way back was impossible. This Tom Thumb had reckoned upon and began to make a terrible din inside the wolf, crying and calling as loud as he could. "Will you be quiet?" said the wolf. "You will wake the folks up." "Look here," cried the little man. "You are very well satisfied, and now I will do something for my own enjoyment," and began again to make all the noise he could. At last the father and mother were awakened, and they ran to the room door and peeped through the chink, and when they saw a wolf in occupation, they ran and fetched weapons, the man an axe, and the wife a scythe. "Stay behind," said the man as they entered the room. "When I have given him a blow, and it does not seem to have killed him, then you must cut at him with your scythe." Then Tom Thumb heard his father's voice and cried, "Dear father, I am here in the wolf's inside." Then the father called out, full of joy, "Thank heaven that we have found our dear child," and told his wife to keep the scythe out of the way, lest Tom Thumb should be hurt with it. Then he drew near and struck the wolf such a blow on the head that he fell down dead. And then he fetched a knife and a pair of scissors, slit up the wolf's body, and let out the little fellow. "Oh, what anxiety we have felt about you," said the father. "Yes, father, I have seen a good deal of the world, and I am very glad to breathe fresh air again." "And where have you been all this time?" asked his father. "Oh, I have been in a mouse hole and a snail's shell in a cow's stomach, and a wolf's inside. Now I think I will stay at home." "And we will not part with you for all the kingdoms of the world," cried the parents as they kissed and hugged their dear little Tom Thumb. And they gave him something to eat and drink and a new suit of clothes, as his old ones were soiled with travel. The Robber Bridegroom. There was once a miller who had a beautiful daughter, fair to behold, and gentle of heart. When she was grown to womanhood, the miller became anxious, for he wished above all things that she should be well provided for married into security, and not left alone in the hard world. So he thought to himself, if a decent man of good standing comes to woo her, I shall give her into his keeping. Not long after, there came a suitor, seemingly well-to-do, finely dressed, and courteous of speech. The miller, who knew nothing ill against him, promised him his daughter's hand. Yet the maiden's heart was not warmed toward him, as a bride's heart should be toward her bridegroom. She did not trust him. Whenever she beheld his face, or even called him to mind, there fell a cold shiver upon her soul, as though a shadow had passed across the sun. One day, the suitor spoke. You are to be my bride, yet you have never visited my house. The girl answered softly, I know not where your dwelling lies. He said, my house stands far away, deep within the forest. You must come to me next Sunday, for I have invited company, and I will strew ashes along the path so that you shall not lose your way. The girl would have excused herself, saying the way was long and dark, but the suitor pressed her so strongly that she was forced to give her promise. When Sunday came, she set out with a heavy heart, though she knew not why. And because unease gnawed at her, she filled both her pockets with peas and lentils before she left. The path through the forest had indeed been strewn with ashes, yet at every step she cast to the right and left a handful of peas, so that behind her there should grow a track to lead her home again. The deeper she went, the darker grew the wood, until she reached its heart, where not even the noonday sun could pierce the gloom. There in the shadow stood a lonely house, grim and unwelcoming, with shuttered windows and a roof that bent low, as if the building itself wished to hide from sight. The maiden entered, but no living soul was to be seen. A stillness hung over the rooms so thick it seemed to choke her breath. Then suddenly a voice rang out, turn back, thou pretty bride. Within this house thou must not bide, for here do evil things betide. She turned quickly, and saw that the voice came from a bird in a cage hanging upon the wall. And again it sang its warning, the same dark rhyme. Fear tugged at her, yet she wandered from room to room, and everywhere it was empty, bare and forsaken. At last she came to a cellar, and there she spied a very old woman, nodding her head by the fire. "Good mother," said the bride, "does my bridegroom dwell in this house?" The old woman lifted her eyes weary and full of pity. "Poor child," she whispered, "do you know where you are? This is a house of murderers. You thought to find your bridegroom here, but it is death himself who awaits you. They will seize you, cut you in pieces, and devour you, for they are men who feed on human flesh. Unless I take pity and hide you, your fate is sealed." Then the old woman pushed her quickly behind a great cask. "Be still as a mouse," she said, "and stir not. When night falls and the robbers sleep, we will flee. I have long sought a chance to escape their wickedness." Scarcely had she spoken when the gang of robbers came home. They were wild and drunken, dragging with them another young maiden. The poor girl shrieked and pleaded, but they forced her to drink 3 glasses of wine, white red and yellow. When her cries grew faint, they drew their knives, cut her in pieces, and prepared to feast upon her flesh. From her hiding place, the bride trembled in every limb, scarcely daring to breathe. Her heart pounded so loud she feared it would betray her. Then one of the villains noticed a gold ring upon the dead girl's finger. As it would not come off, he seized an axe and struck so that the finger flew across the floor and fell behind the cask straight into the bride's lap. She clutched it in terror, frozen like stone. The robber raised a light to search for it. "The finger must be here," he muttered. Another said, "Look behind the cask." But the old woman cried out sharply, "Come to supper now. Leave the search till morning. The finger cannot run away." The men grumbled, but her words prevailed. They sat at table, drinking and devouring their ghastly meal. The old woman poured a sleeping draught into their cups, and before long their heads sank, and the cellar shook with their heavy snores. Then the old woman and the bride stole forth. Carefully, the girl stepped among the sprawled bodies afraid each moment lest a hand should seize her. Yet fortune favored her, and they came to the door and out into the night. The ashes on the path were gone, blown away by the wind, but the peas and lentils had sprouted, and by the silver light of the moon, the green shoots marked a shining trail through the forest. Thus they found their way safely back to the mill, where the maiden told her father all. When the wedding day arrived, friends and neighbors gathered at the miller's house. The bridegroom also came well clad, with smiling lips, though his eyes betrayed unrest. At table, each guest was bidden to tell a tale. The bride sat silent until at last the bridegroom pressed her. "Sweetheart, do you know no story? Speak, for your turn has come." Then she answered, "I will tell you a dream that visited me. I wandered alone in a dark wood until I came to a house where no living soul was found, save a bird in a cage that sang, 'Turn back, thou pretty bride. Within this house thou must not bide, for evil things do here betide.' I went through the rooms, and all stood empty, bleak and joyless. At last I came to a cellar where sat an ancient woman who told me that I was among cutthroats and that my bridegroom would slay me, cut me in pieces, and feast upon me. Yet she hid me behind a cask. Soon the robbers came dragging another maiden, whom they gave to drink of white, red, and yellow wine. Then they murdered her. One among them sought to take a golden ring from her finger, but when he could not, he struck off the finger with an axe, and lo, the finger sprang away and fell into my lap. And here it lies, with the ring upon it." At these words, she drew forth the grisly token and laid it before them. The suitor, who had grown pale as death during the tale, sprang up, seeking to flee. But the company seized him fast, and he and his whole band were delivered into the hands of justice. For their evil deeds they were condemned, and none escaped the punishment of the law. The Elves' first story. There was once a shoemaker who, through no fault of his own, had fallen into such deep poverty that he owned nothing in the world except a small piece of leather, enough only for a single pair of shoes. One evening, with a heavy yet honest heart, he carefully cut out the leather, thinking to begin work on the shoes the next morning. Having done all he could, he commended himself to God, laid his head upon the pillow with a clear conscience, and soon drifted into sleep. When morning came, he rose early, said his prayers, and prepared to set to work. But to his astonishment, on the table lay 2 shoes already finished. They were not roughly sewn together, as one might expect from hurried hands, but stitched with such precision and neatness that they seemed a masterpiece fit for kings. He gazed in wonder, scarcely daring to believe his own eyes. Soon a customer entered the shop, and being taken with the excellent quality of the shoes, paid him a price higher than was usual. With this money, the shoemaker bought leather for 2 more pairs. That evening, he cut the leather as before, and in the morning he found both pairs finished fine and flawless. Buyers quickly appeared, and again he earned enough to buy leather for 4 pairs. This pattern continued. Whatever he cut out at night was completed by morning, and the mysterious workmanship never faltered. In this way, his misfortune was turned to blessing. Day by day, he grew more prosperous, until at last he had regained not only independence, but also abundance. Now it happened that near Christmas, as he sat one evening cutting leather, he spoke to his wife. "What say you, if we keep watch tonight to see who grants us this unseen aid?" The woman agreed gladly, lit a candle, and together they hid in a corner of the room, behind hanging clothes. At midnight, when the house lay in silence, 2 tiny men slipped in. They wore not a thread upon their bodies, but were nimble and merry. Sitting at the shoemaker's table, they worked swiftly, with their little hands stitching and hammering with such skill that the shoemaker could scarce turn away his eyes for wonder. In no time, the shoes stood finished, and away the little men darted as swiftly as they had come. The next morning, the shoemaker's wife said, "These small folk have made us rich. It would not be right if we offered no gratitude. They run about with nothing to cover themselves, and must surely be cold. I shall make them shirts, coats, vests, and trousers, and even knit them stockings. Do you, husband, make them each a tiny pair of shoes?" The shoemaker agreed with joy, and by Christmastide, everything was ready. That night, they laid the little garments upon the table instead of cut leather, and again hid themselves to watch. When midnight struck, the little men bounded in, intending to work. But finding no leather, only the neat array of clothes, they stood, amazed. Then in delight, they dressed themselves quickly, admiring how fine they looked, and sang in ringing voices, "Now we are boys, so fair to see. No longer cobblers shall we be." They danced and skipped about the room, leaping over benches and chairs, until at last they sprang out into the night and were seen no more. But from that time forward, fortune never forsook the shoemaker, and all that he undertook prospered. Second story. There was once a poor servant girl, humble and diligent. Each day she swept the house clean and carried her sweepings to the great heap before the door. One morning, as she turned to her work, she spied upon the heap a folded letter. Being able to read, she laid aside her broom and carried the letter to her master and mistress. To their surprise, it was an invitation from the Elves, requesting that the girl should stand godmother to a child at its christening. The girl hesitated, for she was timid, and did not understand why she had been chosen. Yet her master and mistress urged her to accept, saying it was unwise to refuse such an honor. At last she consented. Soon 3 elves arrived, small but graceful, and led her into a hollow mountain where their folk dwelt. There, everything was fashioned on a delicate scale, but with a richness beyond words. The child's mother lay in a bed of ebony adorned with pearls, its coverlet embroidered in gold. A cradle of ivory stood near, and the baby's bath was of shining gold. The girl served as godmother with all humility, and when the ceremony was ended, she wished to return home. But the elves entreated her sweetly to remain 3 days. So she stayed, and during that time they treated her with kindness, feasting her with fine dishes, entertaining her with music and dance, and doing all in their power to make her happy. At the end of 3 days, they filled her pockets with gold and silver until she could carry no more, then led her out of the mountain. When she came home, she took up the broom that still stood in the corner and began to sweep as if no time had passed. But as she swept, strangers came into the house, asking who she was and why she worked there. Then she learned that not 3 days, but 7 long years had flown while she tarried with the elves, and in that time her old masters had died, and all was changed. Third story. There was once a mother whose child had been stolen away from its cradle by elves. In its place, they had left a changeling, a creature with a great round head, staring eyes, and greedy lips that did naught but eat and drink. The poor woman, troubled and desperate, sought counsel from her neighbor. "Carry the strange child into the kitchen," said the neighbor. "Set it upon the hearth. Light a fire and boil water in 2 eggshells. Such a sight will make it laugh, and once it laughs, the spell is broken." The mother did as she was told. She placed the changeling on the hearth, set 2 eggshells filled with water upon the fire, and waited. Then the imp rolled its eyes and muttered, "I am as old as the wester wood, but never yet have I understood. To see the like of this strange thing, water boiled in an eggshell, thin." At this, he burst into laughter, shrill and wild. In that instant, a host of little elves swept into the room, carrying the true child in their arms. They placed it gently on the hearth, whole and unharmed, and seized the changeling away. Thus was the mother's sorrow turned into joy, and her child restored to her once more. Godfather Death. There once lived a poor man who had 12 children. Every day he bent his back at heavy labor, and every night he returned weary to his cottage, only to find 12 hungry mouths waiting to be fed. Bread was scarce, work was endless, and yet he bore it all with patience. But when a 13th child came into the world, his heart failed him. He did not know how he would provide for another life, nor where to turn in such desperate need. In his sorrow, he rushed out into the open road, resolving that the very first being he met should serve as godfather to the child. Not long had he gone when the Lord God himself came walking toward him. God already knew the man's troubled thoughts, and he spoke gently. "Poor man, I take pity on your hardship. I will stand at your child's baptism. I will care for him, guide him, and grant him happiness upon the earth." The man looked at him and asked, "Who are you?" "I am God," said the Lord. But the poor man frowned and shook his head. "No, I will not have you as godfather. You give wealth to the rich, and let the poor perish with hunger." For the man did not understand how wisely God divides fortune and trial among humankind. So he turned away and went along his road. Soon, another figure appeared. It was the devil himself. He stopped before the man and asked, "What are you seeking?" If you will take me for your child's godfather, I will grant him heaps of gold and every pleasure the world can give." "Who are you?" asked the man. "I am the devil." "Then I will not have you as godfather either," replied the man. "You deceive mankind and lead them astray from the good path." With that, he went on. At last, death came toward him, hobbling on withered legs, pale and ancient. Death said, "Take me as your child's godfather." The man asked, "Who are you?" "I am Death, who makes all men equal." The poor man bowed his head. "You are the right one. You take both rich and poor, without distinction. You shall be my child's godfather." And Death said, "I will make your child rich and renowned, for he who has me as his friend cannot fail." The man answered, "Next Sunday is the baptism. Be there without delay." And Death came, as he had promised, stood godfather at the font, and carried out his duty in an orderly fashion. When the boy had grown to manhood, Death appeared to him and said, "Come with me, my godson." He led him deep into the forest and showed him a small herb growing there. "Now you shall receive my gift. I will make you a great physician. Whenever you are called to the sick, I shall appear beside you. If you see me at the sick man's head, then say with confidence that he will recover. Give him some of this herb, and he will be made well. But if I stand at the sick man's feet, then he belongs to me, and no earthly skill may save him. Beware, however, of deceiving me, for if you act against my will, it will cost you dearly." Not long afterward, the youth's fame spread across the land. People said of him, "This physician needs only to look at the sick, and at once he knows their fate, whether they will rise again or fall into the grave." From far and wide, people brought him to their households, and his hands were soon filled with gold. He became rich, and his name was spoken with wonder. One day, the king himself fell ill. The young physician was summoned to the palace, and all eyes turned to him. He approached the royal bed, but there at the king's feet stood Death. No herb on earth could help. Yet the physician thought, "If only this once I could cheat Death. Surely, as I am his godson, he will forgive me and close one eye." So he turned the king upon his bed, so that Death now stood at his head. Then he gave the herb, and the king's strength returned. The kingdom rejoiced, but Death came to his godson, his face dark and furious. He lifted his bony finger and said, "You have betrayed me. For the sake of our bond, I will overlook it this time. But beware, if you do this again, it will cost you your own life." Not long after, the king's only daughter grew sick. She was so beautiful that her radiance outshone the roses of spring. The king wept day and night until his eyes grew dim, and he proclaimed throughout the land, "Whoever saves my child shall have her for his bride and inherit the crown." The physician came to her bedside and saw death at her feet. He knew well his godfather's warning. Yet love and desire overcame wisdom. The thought of the crown and of the maiden's beauty burned in his heart. He turned her upon her bed so that death stood at her head. Then he gave her the herb, and life returned to her cheeks, and she rose once more. But death cheated. A second time lifted his withered fist in wrath. He seized his godson in his ice-cold grip. "Now it is your turn," he said, and dragged him away into a cavern beneath the earth. There the physician beheld countless candles burning in endless rows, some tall, some middling, others small and flickering. Every moment some went out, and others were newly lit, so that the flames danced in ceaseless change. Death said, "Behold, these are the life lights of mankind. The tall ones are the children, the middling belong to men and women in their prime, and the little stumps to the aged. Yet even the young often have but a tiny flame." "Show me mine," said the physician, expecting it to be long and strong. Death pointed to a small stump, trembling and ready to die. "There it is." The physician shuddered. "Oh, dear godfather, light me another. Do me this kindness, that I may live to be king and wed the princess." Death answered, "It cannot be. One flame must go out before another is lit. Then at least set this dying flame upon a new candle, so that it may continue to burn." Death, pretending to grant his request, took up a tall candle, but in vengeance he fumbled deliberately. The little stump fell and was extinguished. The physician fell lifeless to the ground, and thus he too came into the hands of death. The Godfather. There once lived a poor man, humble and weary, who dwelt in a crooked little hut at the edge of a dark forest. His clothing was patched, His hands were calloused from toil, and his table was rarely spread with more than a crust of bread and a cup of thin broth. Yet he bore one treasure above all others, a great multitude of children. They came one after another, so many that the neighbors whispered he must have forgotten to count them. And with every child, as was the custom, he sought a godfather. But alas, he had already asked all the folk he knew, friends, strangers, the rich and the poor alike, until no one on earth remained whom he might invite. When yet another child was born, the poor man was overcome with despair. He sat by the hearth, head in hands, asking himself whom he could choose for a child. Without a godfather was a child without protection in the eyes of heaven. The more he pondered, the darker his thoughts became, until weariness pressed him into slumber, and in his sleep he dreamt. A voice, soft yet commanding, spoke into his ear. Go outside the city gate. The first person you meet there shall be godfather to your child. The poor man awoke with the dream heavy upon his heart, and though he feared it was folly, he trusted the vision. He wrapped his cloak around his shoulders, stepped outside the gate, and there, just as the dream foretold, he met a tall, cloaked stranger. The man bowed low and spoke with trembling voice. Good sir, would you grant me the honor of being godfather to my newborn child? The stranger's eyes gleamed with a strange light. He placed into the poor man's hand a little vial made of glass, filled with clear water that shone like moonlight. Then he said, Take this water, for it is no ordinary water, but one of wonder and power. With it you shall heal the sick. Yet heed my words carefully. You must always look to see where death is standing. If death is at the head of the sickbed, give the patient a sip, and he will rise well again. But if death stands at the feet, then all your care will be in vain, for none may turn aside that fate. From that day forth, the poor man possessed a gift unlike any other. He entered cottages and palaces alike, looked to the bed, and always knew whether hope remained. Soon his fame spread far and wide, and though he had once owned nothing, now he earned godre and favor from every corner of the land. It happened that the king himself called for the man, for his only child lay deathly ill. The poor man entered the royal chamber, and to his relief, he saw Death standing by the child's head. He poured a drop of the wondrous water upon the child's lips, and lo, the prince opened his eyes and lived. A second time, the prince fell into sickness, and again the healer came, and again Death stood by the head, and again the child was saved. But when the illness returned a third time, the poor man saw with dread that Death now stood solemnly at the foot of the bed. He knew then that even the water could not help, and the prince's soul departed. In time, the poor man's heart was stirred with curiosity. He wished to see once more the mysterious Godfather who had given him the gift. So he journeyed far until he found the strange house where the Godfather was said to dwell. The place was unlike any dwelling of men. On the first flight of stairs, a broom and a shovel were quarreling fiercely, striking one another with blows as though they were alive. Bewildered, the man asked, "Pray tell, where does the Godfather live?" And the broom answered, "Climb one flight higher." On the second flight, he beheld a heap of severed fingers, pale and lifeless. His blood ran cold. Yet when he asked, "Where dwells the Godfather?" one of the fingers stirred and whispered, "One flight higher." On the third flight, there lay a dreadful heap of severed heads, eyeless and grim. They rolled slightly, as though restless. The man trembled, yet asked again, "Where is the Godfather?" And the heads murmured together, "One flight higher." On the fourth flight, he found fishes lying in iron pans sizzling upon the fire. Strangely, they turned themselves over and baked themselves without hand or cook. Still, they hissed in chorus, "One flight higher." At last, he reached the fifth flight. There he spied a door and bent to the keyhole. What he saw made his hair rise. The Godfather himself sat within, but now his brow bore a pair of long, curling horns. Terrified, the man opened the door. At once, the Godfather leapt into bed, pulling the covers over himself as though nothing were amiss. "Sir Godfather," said the man, trembling, "your household is most strange indeed." On the first flight, the broom and the shovel quarreled as though alive. "How foolish you are," cried the Godfather. Those were but the boy and the maid exchanging words. But on the second flight, said the man, "I saw severed fingers lying in a heap. Simpleton, replied the godfather. Those were roots of scorzonera, and on the third flight lay severed heads. Blind man, they were nothing more than cabbages. And on the fourth flight, fishes fried themselves in pans. At that moment, the fishes came leaping forth and served themselves on platters. And on the fifth, the man stammered, I peered through the keyhole and saw you, dear godfather, with horns as long as my arm. Liar, thundered the godfather, his face turning dreadful. The poor man's courage failed. He fled down the stairs, past broom and shovel, past fingers and heads, past the self-baking fishes, until he burst into the open air. And it was well that he did, for had he tarried even a moment longer, who knows what fate the godfather would have dealt him. The Wedding of Mrs. Fox. First story expanded. Once upon a time, there lived an old fox, a creature already bent with years, who bore 9 long and splendid tails. Yet though he seemed wise and content, a shadow of doubt settled upon his heart. He began to believe that his wife, fair Mistress Fox, might no longer be faithful to him. Eager to test her, he laid a cunning plan. One morning, he stretched himself beneath the wooden bench, lay stiff and silent, and pretended to be stone dead. Upstairs, Mistress Fox went into her chamber, locked the door, and sat sighing in loneliness. Below by the fire sat her maid, Miss Cat, who stirred the pots and prepared the meals, when whispers spread through the forest that old Mr. Fox was dead. Suitors from near and far hastened to try their luck. The first to knock upon the door was a young fox with fur bright as autumn leaves. He tapped gently and called, "What are you about, Miss Cat? Do you slumber, or do you chat?" The cat replied with a purr, "I slumber not, I wake indeed. I stir the pot for mistress's need. Warm beer with butter, rich, I brew. Would you not come and sip it too?" "No, thank you, kind miss," said the fox. "But tell me how fares Mistress Fox?" The maid answered in mournful rhyme, "She sits alone in her chamber, small, her tears like raindrops downward fall. Her little eyes are swollen red, because old Master Fox lies dead." "Then pray," said the young wooer, "announce me, for I would gladly win her hand." Up the stairs, Miss Cat went, her paws pattering trip-trap, while her golden rings jingled. She knocked thrice. Tap, tap, tap. Mistress Fox, are you inside? Oh yes, my little cat, she cried. A wooer waits upon the stair. Now tell me, child, what shape and air? The maid replied. He is a fox, yet has but one tail. Mistress Fox shook her head. Then I will have none of him, for my late husband bore 9 fine tails, and I shall take no lesser. So Miss Cat sent the wooer away. Soon another came, and then another. Each bore 2 tails, 3 tails, 4, and more, yet still Mistress Fox refused them all. None seemed worthy, until at last there came a stately fox with 9 splendid tails, flowing like plumes behind him. When Mistress Fox heard this, she clapped her paws with joy. Now, open the gates. The doors throw wide. Bring forth the old fox, though he died. Carry him out without delay, for a wedding feast begins today. But scarcely had the words been spoken when old Mr. Fox, who had lain all the while beneath the bench, sprang to life. His 9 tails bristled, his eyes flashed fire, and he seized a cudgel. With angry blows, he drove out the rabble of wooers and even Mistress Fox herself, and sent them fleeing from the house in shame. Second story expanded. In another, telling the tale ran differently. This time, old Mr. Fox truly was dead, and his house stood silent in mourning. Mistress Fox sat upstairs, her eyes red from weeping, while faithful Miss Cat tended the fire and stirred milk and bread into a sweet broth. Then came a knock. At the door stood a great gray wolf, proud and tall. He bowed low and sang out, good day, dear cat of Carrowit. Why do you by the hearthstone sit? What tasty dish do you prepare to scent the room and warm the air? Miss Cat replied, in milk I crumble bread, so white. Would you, dear sir, partake a bite? No, thank you, kindly, said the wolf. But tell me, where is Mistress Fox? Is she not at home? And the cat answered in rhyme, she sits above in her lonely room, lamenting her sorrow, bewailing her doom. Her heart is heavy, her tears fall sore, for old Mr. Fox is no more. Then said the wolf, go and ask if she would care for a husband bold. Up the stairs ran the cat, her tail flicking this way and that, her golden rings chiming as she knocked upon the parlor door. Are you within good? Mistress Fox, a suitor stands at your door and knocks. Would you care for a husband now? Then kindly step below and bow. Tell me, asked Mistress Fox, does he wear red stockings? And has he a pointed snout? No, answered the cat. Then he will not do for me. The wolf went away, and in his place came many more. First a dog, then a proud state, a quick hare, a roaring bear, a mighty lion, and nearly every beast of the forest. Yet each time one small grace was lacking: a red stocking, a pointed mouth, a fox's manner. And so each wooer was dismissed. At last there came a young fox, handsome and slender. Miss Cat ran to the chamber door once more. Mistress Fox, a fine young fox awaits. He has red stockings upon his legs, and his mouth is sharp and pointed. At this news, Mistress Fox rose at once. Then let him come upstairs, for he alone pleases me. She commanded Miss Cat to prepare the hall. Quickly now, sweep the room so clean. Open the window, let in the sheen. Fling out the old fox, lay him to rest, though many a mouse he caught with zest. Not once of me did he think at all, but ate each morsel fat and small. So the chamber was set. In order, the old fox was carried out, and the young fox was welcomed in. Soon the wedding feast began. The music played, and the beasts of the forest came to dance. And they danced, and they sang, and they feasted so merrily that if they have not tired of it, yet they are surely still dancing to this very day. The Tailor in Heaven. One bright and gentle day, it so befell that the good Lord desired to take his delight in the garden of heaven. He called to him all the apostles and all the saints, and together they walked out into the shining meadows of paradise, so that no soul remained behind save Saint Peter. To him the Lord entrusted the great key and gave this strict command: see to it that no one enters while I am away. So Peter stood faithfully at the heavenly gate, watchful and firm. Not long after, there came a knocking. The sound was timid, but it stirred the stillness. Peter raised his voice. Who knocks there, and what wouldst thou have? A soft and wheedling voice answered. It is I, a poor tailor, an honest man, who begs only for admittance. Peter frowned and shook his head. Honest indeed, thou art one who hast been nimble of fingers and swift with the scissors. Many a hem and sleeve hast thou snipped away that was not thine. Thinkest thou heaven is for such as thee? The Lord hath forbidden me to let any pass while he is abroad. But the tailor cried out with pitiful words, Be merciful, holy keeper. Little scraps that fall of themselves from the shears are no true theft. They are trifles, not worth the telling. Look upon me. I am lame and weary. Blisters burn upon my feet from the long road. I cannot turn back. Only open the gate a little, and I will not trouble thee. I shall labor gladly, bearing the children in my arms, washing their garments, sweeping the benches where they play, and mending what is torn. Let me but creep within, and I shall do the humblest work. Now, Peter's stern heart softened, and pity overcame duty. He opened the door only so wide that the tailor's thin body could slip through. He set him in the shadowy corner behind the gate, and charged him to sit still and silent, lest the Lord on returning should see him and grow wroth. The tailor bowed his head and promised obedience. Yet temptation is a restless master. When Peter once stepped outside, the tailor rose from his corner. Curiosity pricked him like needles, and he wandered through the halls of heaven, gazing upon wonders. He saw radiant courts and shining thrones, choirs of chairs set in bright array. At last, he came upon one seat that outshone all others, a high throne of purest gold, set with gleaming jewels, and before it, a footstool of gold no less splendid. It was the seat of the Lord himself, from which he looked down upon the world, and beheld deeds of men. The tailor's eyes fastened upon it. Long did he stand, for the chair pleased him above all else. At length, his desire burned too hot, and he clambered up and seated himself in the place of the Almighty. Then at once his sight pierced the heavens and reached the earth below. He saw the fields, the towns, the rivers, and all the dealings of humankind. And there by the water's edge he spied an old crooked woman washing linen. He watched as she slyly laid 2 veils aside for her own use. Anger flamed in him sharper than his reason. A thief, he cried, though no one heard him. In his fury, he snatched up the golden footstool and hurled it down through the sky, meaning to strike the woman. But once cast, the stool was lost to heaven, and he could not call it back His courage failed him. He slid down quickly from the high seat, crept again behind the gate, and sat still, as if nothing had stirred. Soon the Lord returned with his company of saints. He passed through the gate, saw not the tailor, and went to his throne. But when he would rest his feet, the stool was gone. Gravely, he asked Peter, "Where is the footstool that stood here?" Peter knew nothing of it. The Lord questioned him further. "Hast thou let any soul within?" Peter shook his head and answered at last, "None, save a lame tailor, who even now sits behind the door." Then the Lord bade the tailor be brought forth. He looked upon him and said, "Tell me truly, didst thou take away my footstool? And what hast thou done with it?" The tailor, thinking to please him, spoke with open joy. "Yes, Lord, I cast it down in righteous anger. For I saw an old woman by the stream, hiding 2 veils that were not hers, and I would punish her as she deserved." Then the Lord's face grew stern. "O foolish knave, if I had judged as thou judgest, how thinkest thou wouldst have fared? Long since should heaven have been bare of seats, of benches, of forks and spoons, for all would I have flung down upon sinners. But justice here is mine alone, and punishment is not for thee, nor for Peter, but for me, the Lord." So he spoke, and with a sign commanded Peter. And Peter was forced to lead the tailor out from heaven's gate. His shoes were torn, his feet raw with blisters, and he took a stick in hand. Thus he went forth again into the world, until he came at last to the place men call "Wait a bit," where the good soldiers sit together and make merry with song and drink. And there he lingered, for heaven was shut against him, and the golden stool was lost forever. Herr Korbes. There once lived in a quiet corner of the countryside a cock and a hen. They were no ordinary birds, for they were filled with a restless longing, a desire to see the world beyond their little yard, beyond the hedges and the garden gate. One day, as the dawn broke and the dew still clung to the grass, the cock said to the hen, "Let us go on a journey together. The wide world waits, and it is time that our little eyes be filled with its wonders." The hen agreed, for she too carried a small flame of curiosity in her breast. The cock, proud and industrious, set himself to work. With his beak and claws, he fashioned a carriage, unlike any carriage the creatures of the farm had seen. It shone with 4 red wheels, polished bright as berries in the sun, and to it he harnessed 4 mice, nimble and sprightly. The hen, dainty and careful, stepped inside with him, and the carriage rolled forward, as if it belonged to some noble procession. The little wheels turned, the little mice piped, and so began their strange adventure. Not far along the road, as the shadows of the morning stretched long, they met a cat. The cat sat by the roadside, licking her whiskers, her eyes half sly and half hungry. "Where do you go, cock and hen, in your bright carriage?" she asked with a soft purr. "We are traveling," replied the cock, "to the house of Herr Korbes." "Then take me with you," said the cat, flicking her tail. The cock considered, then spoke gravely. "Most willingly may you ride, but sit yourself behind us, lest you fall before the carriage. And take care, oh, take great care, that you do not soil my little red wheels. And you little wheels, roll on. And you little mice, pipe forth your shrill tune, for we make our way to the house of Herr Korbes." So the cat sprang lightly behind, and the carriage went on its way. After a time, a millstone lay by the roadside, heavy and gray, weathered by many years. It rumbled in a deep voice. "Whither go you, cock and hen, with your carriage so fine?" "To the house of Herr Korbes," answered the cock. "Take me with you," groaned the millstone, for even stones grow weary of lying still. And though the carriage creaked under the weight, the cock gave consent. The mice strained harder, the wheels turned bravely, and the little procession grew. Soon after came an egg, white and smooth, rolling gently from the meadow. "Oh, let me join you," said the egg, and the cock replied, "Come along. But beware of breaking, for a broken egg brings only mischief." Then a duck, waddling from a pond, with feathers still wet, flapped her wings and begged to be taken. She too was granted a seat. A pin glittered by the roadside, sharp and thin, crying, "Do not leave me behind. I too will ride to Herr Korbes' house." And last of all came a needle, fine and shining, who leapt with a proud jump into the carriage, saying, "Without me, no cloth is stitched, no seam held fast. Surely I may go where you go." So together they all rode, cock and hen in the seat of honor, cat behind millstone, heavy egg, fragile duck flapping, pin gleaming, and needle proud. At length, with much creaking and rolling, they came to the house of Herr Korbes. Yet Herr Korbes was not within. The mice, faithful in their labor, drew the carriage into the barn. The cock and hen flew up to a perch to overlook all. The cat crouched slyly by the hearth. The duck settled herself upon the well pole. The egg rolled into a towel as if to hide. The pin stuck itself in the chair cushion, ready to sting. The needle leapt upon the bed, lying in wait upon the pillow. And the millstone, heavy and silent, hung itself above the door, patient as fate. At last, Herr Korbes came home. He was weary, ill-tempered, and harsh of face. Straight he went to the hearth to light a fire, but the cat sprang forth and flung a shower of ashes into his eyes. Half blinded, he rushed to the kitchen to wash, but there the duck splashed cold water over him, soaking him through. Shivering and cursing, he seized the towel. Yet no sooner had he pressed it to his face than the egg burst upon him, gluing up his eyes with its sticky yolk. Blind and stumbling, he sought rest in his chair. But no peace was there, for the pin pricked him cruelly. With a cry, he leapt to his bed, hoping for comfort. But as soon as his head lay upon the pillow, the needle pierced him so sharply that he screamed aloud. Wild with rage and pain, he sought to flee from his own house. But when he reached the door there, the millstone, silent and patient, dropped down upon him with all its weight and struck him dead. So ended Herr Korbes, and all who heard the tale said the same. Herr Korbes must surely have been a wicked man, else such a fate would never have overtaken him. Frau Trude. There was once a little girl, small of stature but strong in will, who was both obstinate and inquisitive. From her earliest years, she would not bend to the word of her father or the counsel of her mother. When they bade her sweep the hearth, she would run into the meadow. When they told her to spin the flax, she let the wheel stand still and went wandering instead. For she thought within herself, why must I heed their voices when the world is wide and filled with marvels? Thus she grew restless, headstrong, and ever eager for forbidden paths. Now it came to pass that she heard speak of a certain woman, Frau Trude by name, who dwelt not far from the village on the edge of the shadowy forest. And many strange whispers went abroad concerning her. Some said that she was a wise woman, skilled in charms and old secrets of fire and stone. Others muttered that she trafficked with unholy powers, and that her house was full of sights too dreadful for Christian eyes. The girl, being curious above all things, would not rest until she knew the truth. One day, she said to her parents with a bright face and eager tongue, "I have heard so much of Frau Trude. I will surely go to her. People say that all within her dwelling is strange beyond telling, and that there are wonders in every corner. I am resolved to see it with my own eyes." Her father turned pale, and her mother wrung her hands. "Child," they cried together, "speak no more of this. Frau Trude is a wicked woman who does abominable deeds. Whoever crosses her threshold never comes back unchanged. If you set foot in her house, you are no longer daughter of ours." And they threatened her, and they wept, and they implored her with tender words and stern commands alike. But the maiden's heart was harder than oak. Though forbidden, though warned with tears and curses, she nursed her curiosity as one nurses a secret flame. Day and night it burned within her, until at last she could bear it no more. She slipped away when her parents' eyes were turned elsewhere, and went straight through the darkening wood to Frau Trude's dwelling. When she came to the threshold, the air itself seemed heavy, as though thick with smoke. The windows glowed faintly, as if embers smoldered within. She pushed open the creaking door, and there stood Frau Trude, tall and stern, her eyes piercing like coals in the night. "Why art thou so pale, child?" asked the woman, and her voice was like the crackle of dry branches in the fire. "Ah," answered the girl, trembling so that her teeth chattered, "I have been terrified by the things I beheld on the way." "And what didst thou see?" said Frau Trude, and she leaned closer. "I saw a black man upon your steps." "That was but a collier," said the woman with a grim smile. "Then I saw a green man in the shadows. That was a huntsman who comes for the wild game. After that, I saw a man all blood red. That was a butcher with his apron stained," said Frau Trude, her eyes glinting. "Ah, Frau Trude," whispered the maiden, "my fear grew too great. For when I looked through the window, I saw not you at all, but surely, as I believe, the devil himself, with a head that burned with fire." "Oh-ho," laughed Frau Trude, and the laugh was harsh and hollow. "Then thou hast seen the witch in her true attire. Long have I waited for thee. Long hast thou been marked out for my hearth. Thou shalt serve me, and thou shalt give me light. With that she stretched forth her hand, and before the maiden could cry or flee, her body grew stiff and hard. Flesh turned to wood hair, to withered straw, and in the twinkling of an eye, she was no longer a child, but a block of firewood. Frau Trude lifted the log and cast it upon the flames. The fire leapt high, crackling and blazing, and the room was filled with fierce brightness. Then Frau Trude drew a stool close to the hearth, warmed her hands by the glow, and said with a grim content that shines bright for once in a way. And thus ended the tale of the obstinate girl who would not obey, who hungered for forbidden knowledge, and who found her reward in the fire of Frau Trude.